Okay, so my esteemed guests tonight. So James, you might as well start since you've got the mic. So James from Deputy.
Hi, I'm guest slash venue host tonight. So I'm James, staff software engineer at Deputy. And for those who don't know, Deputy is a sort of workforce management platform. It's time and attendance and rostering, scheduling, things like that for shift workers and businesses around the world.
And you're mostly an Android guy?
Yes, I don't really pigeonhole myself. At Deputy, yes. But in the past, I've done hardware interfaces, APIs, desktop apps, and then I settled with mobile.
Great, very good, thank you. And Adam is the CEO and founder of Buzzy. Tell us about you and Buzzy.
That's on?
I've got that.
Oh, cool. Thanks, David. Yeah, Adam from Buzzy, founder. What do I call myself? Husband, father, geek, surfer. Founder of Buzzy. Buzzy's a no-code platform. I'm a geek, so I created a no-code platform. We use generative AI to take an idea to turn it into a brief, into a data model, into a design, which is a Figma file, and then turn it into a working, either responsive application, full stack, either web or native, in about 15 minutes. So we're all about accelerating things and making it easy for you to climb the mountain. I'll talk about that a bit later.
Very good. So iOS and Android?
So we use React Native under the covers for the native apps. So both iOS and Android, and who knows what other platforms, whatever supported, whether we do TV and Windows and stuff down the road. But yeah, at this point in time, it's just iOS and Android.
Right, very good. So the folks who are online, we've muted you, so we get a clear run. But if you want to put your hand up, then we can actually go to questions at some stage. So I think internally here, I think we're you look like a pretty orderly crowd. So I think what we'll do is we can take any questions or comments on the fly, because that'll make it richer, and hopefully we get a biffo somewhere along the way. Eh? So Bess, just next slide, please. This was really a dodgy thing I just did quickly, just to kind of like frame up the different types of things that have been happening. As I mentioned there, there's a bunch of tools that have been around like Notion and Airtable that are actually allowing people to get a lot of stuff done. And even prior to that, whether it was if this then that, or Zapier, there's a lot of stuff that's been around sort of doing things without having to write code. But in that case, IFT and Zapier, they're just connecting different systems and using APIs. So didn't want to sort of focus on any of those sorts of things. MailChimp would you ever think that MailChimp's like no code? Well, kind of like back in the day, you used to write HTML code, and that allowed you to do not much at all, because then you had to figure out then how to actually get it into a SMTP mail message and do all that. And then when tools like MailChimp came along, that actually turned that into a consumer usable thing, or even better than a power user. So that's an example of that. And my company, Contextual, is a little bit like that now for in-app engagement. So the version that we do at the moment, we allow, once our SDK is inside a iOS, Android, or web app, then you can actually do guides and tips and tours on the fly. So we're not trying to be a no-code platform for developers or to displace developers. We're trying to free up developers to push things that, just like with MailChimp, instead of actually getting the dev to do the hard coding of HTML, in this particular case, instead of getting the dev to do the hard coding of engagement inside the application, tool tips, pop-up videos, targeting that at particular users at particular points on their journey, you can use us as the platform for that. And I'll talk a little bit about that later on. Then you've got the web builders, which I mentioned briefly, Bubble and Webflow, etc. Probably everybody's.
I put Buzzy in there as well while I'm here.
So I put you down there, which was app builder, right?
We do web as well.
Oh, you do web as well. Okay, my apologies. And then we get into dev tools as well too. And I probably missed some other categories, but that's where we start to see obviously the AI is starting to bleed in as the earlier. So definitely Adam's on the front end of certainly AI and no code. So that's great to have him here tonight. And we'll also talk to this chap here. I'm sure you'll have a few pointers on that, and at least you'll provide some more color on Copilot and things like that as well too. So is everybody okay with that? Does anybody think I've missed out a massive category that we should be talking about? Okay, cool. Next slide. All right, so let's have a look at Adam's value prop. This is some dude on TikTok. I'm allergic to TikTok.
Apparently you can just ask AI to build apps for you. The tool I'm using to do that is Buzzy.buzz. It's basically just lets you turn Figma designs into full stack web or mobile apps, and it even generates the Figma designs for you, so you really don't have to do anything. Buzzy will even give you these giant component libraries that the AI can use to work off of, and then you just go over to your app here. There's nothing here right now, and you go to plugins and download the Buzzy plugin. They have this AI assistant right here, and I'm just going to ask it really quick, create an app to host local basketball competitions. I'm going to send that, and it's going to start generating me a brief. And boom, it's done generating. It says it finished it, called it Hoop Zone, which I kind of love, and then it gives a whole list of functions, user roles, team captain, admin, user, functions, schedule games, submit scores, tons of stuff. Then we go over to the data model, and I click Generate Data Model. And boom, it generated a bunch of stuff, different data models for standings, scores, games, competition types, things like that. Then we go over to Markup, and we click Generate App Design. Wow, okay, it generated 52 screens, 70 components, 150 fields, all of this completely automatically. And then I just go over here, and I'm gonna click Publish. And back behind it on the actual Figma page, you can see it just generated a ton of those screens, all of that completely automatically. It's wild. Publishes to a QR code, and I can just start testing it. Oh my god, this is crazy. Like, everything just works. There are fields, there are forms. Go to games. Oh my gosh, that's awesome. If you want to give it a try, you can go into the link in my bio. It's a little workshop website, and you can go to the Tools tab, and you'll see a link to it.
What we're doing is we start off with the user prompt. Currently, we're using ChatGPT APIs, GPT-4. We then use that to generate the brief, which think of a brief as like a functional spec. You can iterate on that, you can change it. We then take that and we generate a data model. So one of the things we understood, like we've had our Figma plugin that can be converted into working either web or native for a while. We understood that designers and UX don't always understand or find it hard to do things like the data modeling. And then we take that data model, the brief, and a UI kit that's in Figma that is a best practices UI kit that's responsive and everything. And then we're using AI to define the application or the app definition, which is everything about that application, but we're not using AI to generate the code. So the benefit of that is, so once we put that into the Buzzy runtime, we can then turn that into a website or into a React Native application on the fly. So we're not using ChatGPT to do the actual coding as such, but we're using it to describe the application. And that just means that as somebody who's creating the app, you don't have to maintain all that code. You do need to pay us to keep the runtime there. But so it's not for everybody, but massive speed of helping, if the goal, that's what I was saying before, if the goal is to help you climb to the top of the mountain, some mountains are small, we might get you all the way there. Some mountains, like let's say if we're going to go to Kosciuszko, maybe we'll get you 3/4 of the way there. If your mountain that you need to climb is Everest, maybe we'll get you to base camp, but you better bring the specialists and your pickaxes and everything like that to get to the summit. So, and by that, the specialists, I mean, that's where you do need to bring in your developers and people to do stuff. So it's on a case-by-case basis.
So let's just kind of sort of look at this practically. So I want to do an app that actually shows me the locations of vivid Sydney spots. How would I start? I would actually give me a map-based application, or
yeah, I would start with that prompt of create me an application for Vivid. Actually a good one. We should try this out. And these are the things. Each of the location perhaps has an image. It's obviously got an address. It might have times that showing is going to be on. You also might want to provide things like reviews, so allow people to put in reviews. And then that will be your initial prompt. And from that, it'll create that functional spec with a brief that then you can edit and go on.
Is that literally going and looking up a bunch of templates that you've got, or is it actually describing the data model and you're working backwards from the data model?
So we were actually kind of blown away by what ChatGPT could do and understand. Like, we asked it, like, really it's just clever prompt engineering under the covers. So we started this journey. We built the Buzzy tech over several years. And a couple of years ago, we put the Figma wrapper around it. And then for us, because of the way that we just really trying to get to this data, this app definition point that we can then turn into something, we really looked at how we could use the LLM to help generate that app definition. So once we got that functional spec, the LLM was like insanely good at defining a data model, like scarily good. So, and you know, it really surprised me. I didn't think it would, like, it sometimes gets stuff wrong, and there's subtleties in you know, how you name things like in data relationships, and sometimes it gets confused. But in general, it was like, you know, I did a computing science degree, and I can look at an application and break it into a data model in my head. But for a designer who wasn't trained as such, or doesn't think that way, that's quite a challenge. And it could do an insane job of generating ultimately the metadata. So you can ask it for a data model for a lot of different types of applications, and you can say, you know, give this to me in JSON or SQL or whatever it is, and it does a pretty good job.
So James, have you seen anything similar around that's basically going soup to nuts? Can I say that? Soup to nuts? Nobody knows what that is. I don't know. So I'd say
I have no idea.
beginning to end. Yeah. So you go right up to publishing stage, right? Yeah. Yeah. And that's because of that history you've had building it before. And so when you were building an app creator platform, then at some stage you said, okay, let's take it from Figma to that, and now you're using the GPT to go.
Yeah, so we've always been about how do we get, like, we started off life as like an ugly no-code platform. It was predominantly used by business people for creating apps in a matter of minutes. So there's like ugly back-end apps that you could say, hey, you know, you would go in and you would drag some fields onto a screen and say, I want to capture this data. So people doing things like mapping applications for field reporting and stuff like that, you know, you see the people wandering around, like reading meters and things like that. We started off life like actually doing things like sporting apps and all stuff like that. So what we were creating was basically a platform that went all the way from concept through to actual live deployment. So now what we did is we now allow you to generate an app, and then that's deployed into like an enterprise scale architecture. So into a Kubernetes infrastructure that can be scaled horizontally, vertically. It's all single tenant, so you get your own database cluster that again can be scaled separately. You can break things into microservices if need be. So like we've been doing a lot of work with people around, and we show them what we're doing, and they said they've seen people doing bits of this with AI, like maybe, you know, generating design into Figma components, but nowhere going all the way end to end and actually getting something running on the cloud in a short period of time.
Yeah, I guess yes and no. As Adam said, I think there's a lot of people that have been doing bits and pieces of this for quite some time. And yeah, I guess I have to assume that there's probably a few people out there who were as excited as you guys were, like, hey, we've been building this thing for however long, and now suddenly LLMs are just going to make our life so much easier. Like, they augment what you're already doing. A really great sort of co-pilot, I guess, to what you're doing.
That's exactly, like, we've always just seen it as an accelerator. Like, we're seeing applications that are getting built with this that, like I said, if you're climbing a big mountain, we'll only get you part of the way there. You need to bring in the heavy lifters and your developers to complete things. There's no shying away from that. I think we're a long way from AI being able to do absolutely everything. You need somebody at the helm who's driving this thing and directing it and prompting it and doing the coding bits to plug the gaps. So I think that, yeah, so I think that's what we're saying. It's not one size fits all, and you can't do absolutely everything with it.
Yeah, I think probably the super interesting thing about all this to me is, you mentioned before how MailChimp changed exactly what a product person could do, and then what they needed to hand over then to a developer to get them to take the reins from there. MailChimp shifted that, and over the years we've seen more and more products. And I think from I may be naive, maybe not you, but I think for me this is just another one of those big shifts in that direction, where I don't think it's going to magically take away the need for engineers overnight. But I think like what an MVP looks like now is much different to what an MVP looks like 5, 10, 15 years ago, because of how much you can get done without needing to bring in specialists. So,
and I think what's radically changed too, like, not that I've made a study of MailChimp, but I would thoroughly expect them to move away from templates to generative stuff as well too. And I think Notion seems to be, is anybody a Notion fanatic here? The Notion seemed to be bringing a bunch of stuff in really quickly, which is unfortunate for me because I'm still on Evernote, but such is life. Yeah, so yeah, you would see a lot of augmentation that are actually in things beyond just content creation, certainly around the design side of it. And so it seems like these guys are on the front end of that. So what's really been super compelling for you? What are you seeing coming through as a developer? And I'm going to ask a bunch of questions in a second, just in regards to the landscape. But yeah, what are you seeing that's super cool for you as a senior developer? What's super cool for somebody who's a junior developer, and what's cool for people who don't code? We've already heard one. So
I'll start with junior. I think for junior developers, it's probably something that's very exciting if you are cautiously using these sort of tools. I think we all know ChatGPT makes things up. It's just the nature of LLMs. That's always going to happen. I don't think that's going to change anytime soon. So I think as these models can take larger context windows, and you can feed more real-time data into it, things like that, they will become a little bit more truthy. But I think the danger to me for a junior engineer or someone without a comp sci background or something is you can be led astray, and it seems so legit what it's saying. So that's one thing, but I would absolutely recommend for a junior to be using those sort of tools because they're exciting. And then as you go further and further up, I think to me, it's a big multiplier on just how quickly I can get work done. Because instead of spending 10 minutes Googling some part of a standard library that I've been using for 10 years, but I only have to use it every few months and kind of forget tiny little details. So you go do a quick refresher. So instead of spending 10 minutes now, I spend 10 seconds to get it. And then I know if it's live. Because I'm like, that's wrong.
Yeah,
that's
you can spot the hallucination. Yeah.
Exactly. And I think where the tools really shine is sort of the more senior you get, probably the more you could output from it, because you don't need to double check and you can tell it that it's a big dirty liar.
Yeah.
Try again.
All right, so let's go to the next slide. Hopefully it's the one that oh, not him again. All right. Okay, so this is a guy called Matt Welsh, and he's been pretty lazy. He's led teams at Google and Apple, and he's a professor, or was a professor at Harvard of computer science. So you might know what he's talking about. I don't know. But anyway, he says AI coding assistants such as copilots are only scratching the surface. It seems totally obvious to me that, of course, all programs in the future will ultimately be written by AIs, with humans relegated to, at best, a supervisory role. Okay. So I've included the link there to the original text. So it's not like it's a puff piece or just an opinion. It's literally a guy who sort of knows what he's talking about. So do you guys kind of agree with that? And you want to dare to make a bet on a timeline or any of those sorts of things?
I won't make a bet on a timeline. But I guess in many regards, I kind of agree. I just think that the timeline is maybe a little bit further than what people are assuming. I think everyone's very excited about ChatGPT. But I think that if you think about what he said there, the owner of the company from my first job, he started programming with punch cards, right? Punch cards. And for him, he went right up to, he's probably still programming today, but for him, it's just each thing is a new language. And I think that natural language programming is just another new language, albeit a very cool one, and it makes it a lot more accessible to everyone. But I think that there's always going to be people that don't care about tech. They just want to live their life, do other things, and they don't really care to do the programming side of it. So yeah, well, I agree with this, but I also think that the supervisory role maybe is not the best way of putting it. I think that it's just going to be a different type of programming.
Adam might argue that you are already turning people into supervisors here. It sounds like that's...
I don't know if I agree with that statement. I think like having played around with, the technology and sort of understanding that you do need humans in that supervisory role. I think one of the biggest challenges, that I see is that specifically like with code generation and app generation is when you need to debug something, it's damn hard. Now, if you're looking at code generation, if you generate, thousands of lines of code and then you need to enhance it without understanding that code, that's a huge challenge that I don't know how we're going to solve that now. Like I kind of look at it from a point of view. Have you ever had an argument with Siri? We're going like, okay, please call David. I'll be calling Mary. No, David. Oh, what time did you want to do that? And no, David, called David. And it's like, I think that if you're giving instructions to the AI ultimately to set a goal for it to create an application, at some point of time, you have to have granular control over what that application is, either to enhance it or to debug it. So I don't know how that's going to, like to say that everything's going to just be created by AI and you're going to be able to issue some instruction. Doesn't the instruction then just become the code? Like I think the coding level will go up, but you're still going to have a way to granularly control those elements. Like, maybe today you've got Copilot and, that's going to help you to a certain degree and it writes. So we're using Copilot for our developers and it's awesome. We talked about the Figma file becomes the code for us in our applications, but that's still the code. And then if we take it up a level, and so we're adding a new feature in at the moment that you don't need the Figma file, you just write the prompt and it creates the app for you. Then I'm going like, how do you change that? Like, oh no, I just want to move that button over there. Move the button to the left. And it's like, at some point in time, you really just want to take that button and just move it there or there and change its color and change it becomes coding. So I think coding will change. I don't know if all coding will be done by AI. I do think this will need to be regulated because I think there's a lot of other reasons for that. But that's kind of, maybe I don't fully understand where he's coming from and he's way smarter than me. But yeah. Look, I think regulation is a really tricky topic. And I've listened to, you can say at one level, it's the cat's out of the bag and I kind of look at it like knives and nuclear weapons. They awesome tech. They can be used for a lot of good and for a lot of bad. And there are rules out there that say, okay, right, you can't carry a knife of this particular size and, on your body or whatever, or bring it into a class in school. It's got to be regulated. So I think AI is incredibly powerful. This is just my take, by the way. You don't have to agree with me. But
I thought he was going to talk about regulation of coders, but yeah, so I
Yeah.
wanted, and this is the kind of unfun part of being a moderator of this stuff, particularly with the AI ones that I've done. I want to keep it on topic just in terms of practical things, because there is lots of side topics that are super important, but it's beyond the scope of this particular thing. So I don't know what you're asking there, but just what we'll do is we'll just stick on the code side of it for now, if that's okay. So, so Lex Fridman sits with Sam Altman for like 2.5 hours. It feels like 3,000 hours, and asks the question, wouldn't that mean that there'll be need for much fewer programmers in the world? And Altman says, I think the world is going to find out that if you can have 10 times as much code at the same price, I don't like what you're saying, you can just use it to write even more code. I think there is a supply issue. And I was asked the question today, doesn't that mean more code bloat? Lotus Notes fan. It's not about more bloat inside an existing code, but you can basically solve more problems on the planet, or maybe off the planet as well. So just that kind of question there. So throw it to you guys. Agree, disagree?
I'll jump in. I was listening to a podcast recently, and there was an analogy about lawyers, and there was a village somewhere in the US, and there was a lawyer, and he was kind of not very busy. And another lawyer moved into town, and all of a sudden things got really busy. So I think the way I kind of look at that analogy is that everyone was suing everybody. And I think if the more ability that we give people to write applications, there is a finite resource of coders that exist at this point in time. I think the last time I checked was something like 0.03% of the world population. The more ability for people to create applications, the more requirement there are going to be for coders to come and fill the gaps. I think we get to do the really fun stuff and not the boring stuff. That's my take.
Mine is boring because it's exactly the same as yours. I think, yeah, totally agree. I think this whole thing is going to just change how it'll kind of just free up people who are doing work today in software development that tomorrow will be done by AI. It's not that those people disappear and have to go find new careers. I think they just get to start solving more interesting problems. And they just kind of shift into, I mean, with every new technology, there's always going to be some limitation, right? And then the builders of that technology live sort of on the edge of those limitations and listen to feedback from their consumers and go, okay, how do we improve this? How do we expand upon it? All that sort of thing. So I think that's where that's the direction we're going.
So I kind of feel as though you two have kind of contradicted yourselves. So you said before that the debugging is hard, but in fact, at the moment, the AI, all it's really good at doing is generating code that it's seen before, and debugging is not part of that. So we can assume that, and maybe it won't be LLMs that do this, but so we're seeing, so Palm 2 from Google allows you to have your own instance, allows you to absorb as many tokens as you will. Well, sorry, there are limits, but we will get to a particular point where the more tokens could consume your code base, and then you could actually have the AI doing maintenance. So that's where I was getting to, maintenance, debugging, that's the boring stuff. And you would hope that it would be able to do that. But you said, okay, well, maintenance and debugging is the hard bit. So it's the unfortunate boring part of most development jobs, particularly if you take over somebody else's code.
I'll take this to start with, and then I'll think it over. But I think that in my mind, right, I don't think that these tools aren't going to be able to handle debugging and things like that. I think that's coming very, very quickly, to be honest. I wouldn't be surprised if Copilot can handle some pretty impressive refactoring and debugging issues by the end of this year. But I think, again, going to like, what's the edge of these tools and their limitations? I think it just means that, okay, you're no longer going to have to debug this one particular thing, and the tool will do that for you. But there's another issue over here and the tool does not know how to debug that. And then and I think that's what I mean by we just will have to start solving more interesting problems and new problems that we probably can't even comprehend right now. Yeah.
Yeah, that this is a complex topic. But I think I kind of look at it a bit like a repo. So if you're coding and you use like a repo on GitHub or wherever it is you get it from, you kind of expect that code to work. And hopefully you've never had to debug it. There's a few times where I've had to get into the repos and debug stuff, and that's really hard. So I think like what I was trying to say before is that we kind of like what AI is doing is providing more and more out of box, the similar concept to repos that you can then just tie together with specific code that you will still need to debug and hopefully not have to understand what's in those repos. I think there's different ways.
Referring to like React Native plugins for your stuff? Is that what you're?
Yeah, there could be plugins, there could be Node.js, or there could be whatever language that, you know, whatever repository that's out there on GitHub or you know, that you use. It's just like that thing is like a black box that you hope works per the spec. And I think what I was talking about in terms of the fun stuff and the debugging, like I'd rather talk about, okay, right, how do we get that one tied together with some code, whether you're using AI to help tie that stuff together or you having to use your own coding skills. I think that's where it's going to get, you know, really interesting. From a point of view of, there's just so much capacity that we have to understand a chunk of code. And I agree with you that I think that AI, as they increase the window size and everything, will have more capacity. But the question is, how do you tell it what to do? How do you tell it that there's actually a bug over there? And how does it then work that out? I think there's a huge challenge.
Doesn't it generate unit tests based on?
Yeah, but unit tests is only, we're talking about like system tests and high level tests and, you know, usability testing and stuff like that. So, end-to-end user testing. But I think that, yeah, like, I don't know if I trust it. It's maybe part of the problem. Like I've seen, like I went in and I've gone, okay, right, go and create me an application for this in ChatGPT, and it's going, you know, out comes the application. Now write this for it, and I'm now going, okay, is this code robust? And he goes, no, here are 5 things that it needs to add in. I said, can you please add it in? He goes, no, find a developer. So,
Really?
yeah. So, and I'm sure it'll get better at closing those gaps. But I think it's kind of like you're getting to the situation where it's just creating more and more code. And then eventually when you need to find a developer, you're going, oh my, like there's now 20,000 lines of code over here that I've never, no one in the world has ever seen except the AI.
Yeah.
And it doesn't, we don't know the instruction to give it to tell it to fix that particular bug.
Yeah.
It kind of gets into an interesting conundrum.
Okay, great. Thanks. Next, thanks, Bess. Oh, okay. So this is just my proposal, which is sort of to do with, you know, if you're going to write more code, then if you've got a lot of offshore developers, and if you've done a lot of offshoring like I have over the last 20 years, you kiss a lot of frogs, and most of them are frogs. Every now and again you get lucky. But you know, 1,000 offshoring companies, you know, are always hitting my email and LinkedIn and so on and so forth. They will be the big losers out of this, because you'll actually get a lot more done without having to sort of go through the offshoring process until you would get to that kind of like base camp issue or halfway up the mountain issue. Am I completely wrong on this statement?
I have some thoughts on this. That feels like the intuitive answer, that they will lose out in this, but actually, who's to say that companies that run these like offshore software houses, who's to say that they're not going to use all the generative AI tools to upskill their engineers and end up producing some pretty amazing stuff? Exactly. And not just that, but like communication, which I know many companies that I've worked for have tried offshoring of various sizes. And one of the biggest problems was communication lines, miscommunication with specifications, code handover, things like that. If generative AI can solve a lot of those communication problems, maybe these guys become winners. Yeah, just that I have no idea what's going to happen. That's just, yeah, I just thought maybe that's an interesting point.
We did an interesting exercise recently, which is we were hiring for dev, and we basically said, you kind of you must use some sort of AI in the process. You know, we didn't want anybody to sort of create an uneven landscape. So we just said, you know, really, you must do that. But we were still able to figure out who were the more intelligent developers, because we were asking them to. It's like the old open book exams, in the sense that you I can't remember if that's the right term or not, but you know, you've got enough information, but how you apply that particular input. And so that's, again, that comes down to offshores or junior devs who are intelligent enough or understand enough of the, you know, the molecular level stuff or the macro in order to apply it at an application layer. Anyway, that's just an